Alrighty. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Title 21 Committee of the Anchorage Assembly. It's July 29th. We'll start with introductions. Erica, you want to start?
Erica McConnell, current planning manager.
Sharon, that parking lot.
Sharon Walsh, acting deputy director and acting building official.
Carol Wong, Long Reach Planning.
Pete
Peterson Assembly.
Bill Evans, something they're gonna own.
Ernie Hall.
Amy Domboski.
Dennis Wheeler, General Public.
Welcome, Dennis.
John Weddleton.
Welcome this morning.
John O'Day.
Welcome. Alrighty, we're gonna just start. We've done that. You'll see I have got my stuff kind of together, and I do have an agenda for you. This will kind of, in my view, be the agenda as we move forward. I want a couple standing updates. One of them will be on the land use plan map, and then the other is marijuana related planning and zoning issues. And then, of course, the Title 21 Committee work plan. But I'll start every meeting with the agenda, and I want to start every meeting with member comments. I think that's an easy way to go, especially if there's something on the agenda that's we feel is more important than everything else, so we can shift it. But we'll just start with that. So with that, Mr. Hall, do you want to start?
I would. I'm probably going to just kind of do some getting some stuff off my chest this morning. Honestly, I went home last night, and for the first time in many years, I had a problem sleeping. I could not get Title 21 out of my head. I've been engaged with the Live, Work, Play group for going on 20 months now. And I've been engaged in it. I've just basically been sitting through the meetings, listening to them. And I've seen them kind of go from here to here. I saw it start, you know, we were talking about the new Title 21. There was some excitement there, some projects that people could see that were going to happen, that they were going to be able to use the new Title 21. And as we evolved and went further and further through it, I got to the point where I started to hear the frustration begin to come out in them, and eventually evolved to a work session that they sit there and basically express their issues that this isn't working, this won't work. We can't get from point A to point B. The formulas are too difficult. And out of that, we introduced an ordinance that was what I would put on the term of extreme. And not that I necessarily ever thought that ordinance would pass just like it was introduced, but I think it was an ordinance that needed to have a conversation. I think what's going to come out of that conversation is we'll be working with Mr. Evans on AO 76, and we'll come up with a compromise, and we'll have a piece of legislation that I feel will work. But I'm going to tell you, last night, we had a simple little ordinance on order boards, order signs. Mr. Evans made an amendment to it that I thought was very logical because it's what I've been hearing from that group. You've got to give some flexibility. You've got to give some discretion. You're having us do everything cookie cutter here. Boom, 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 boom. And quite honestly, the only thing we didn't have in that ordinance as it was written was the font. You could have flexibility in that. But we have debate, and as typical, you hear from different assembly members. Mr. Honeman is always pretty much in the same thing. He's concerned about the 80s and what happened then, and there's no way I want that to happen again, so we're going to stay rigid. And Mr. Flynn, he typically will do as he did and say, well, this is just part of a greater sign ordinance here. Why would we tinker with this without... Ladies and gentlemen, we can't open the sign ordinance and redo the entire sign ordinance. When we adopted Chapter 21, we all knew that there were things in it that need to be fixed. And when we fixed it, we would go in and fix this. We weren't going to go in and say, okay, we're going to deal with Title 21, we'll open the whole thing up and start over again. We have to do this piecemeal, and we've got to do it in a manner that we're listening to the public out there that have elected us, that are some of the major taxpayers in this community, that are asking us, please think about this. Give us the ability to develop property and address the housing market here. But we're going to have to be willing to work together. And, with staff, you guys, there's been times that I couldn't praise you more. I mean, you do a phenomenal job, but there's other times, and honestly, you know, this is just my observation. You guys can debate it, but I don't know of a time that we've really come in with a ordinance that will address a Title 21 where it's not opposed by staff. There are some times that you will accept it and not say anything, but we also have the issue when we get into meetings. You know, we all have an issue with body language, but it gets pretty strong sometimes. When we're discussing, let's see if we can do something to give you guys some flexibility. And I think we've got to move there. I understand that it's tough sometimes if you're in a position where decisions need to be made by an individual, and if that's a problem, I would urge a group of 3 or a committee or whatever, and if a developer comes in with something that you think, well, this could be okay, but maybe not quite, if we give you the flexibility, surely 3 or 4 of you could sit down and relatively quickly address that without someone ending up on the hook over it. But we have got to change. We have got to move forward. We've got to raise the bar. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of my frustration is, you know, I'm not a young man anymore. I'm 72. I've been in this community 40 years. I remember when I went on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, oil was flowing, the cash was flowing into the state treasury at a rate that was beyond comprehension. And we as a body constantly sent resolutions to the state legislature saying, please develop a long-range sustainable fiscal plan. Please do that. Here we are 35 years later, and we still don't have a long-range sustainable fiscal plan for the state of Alaska. In my 5.5 years on this body, you know, I'm not quite 5.5, but I'm getting to that point. I'm getting to where I'm having deja vu, to where we're having the same conversations over and over and over, and we've got to do something to make change. So I like where this committee is talking about going. Identify something within Title 21 that needs to be addressed. Let's look at what we need to do to make changes if we need to be able to make it workable so that we can get development really moving ahead. My concern at this point in time, quite honestly, is if the state doesn't get its act together, I'm not sure we're going to have a problem, because I think we may see a real slowdown in what happens within the state of Alaska just because the state revenue share. But, you know, all I'm asking is let's all of us become one cohesive team. And look, I loved a comment the mayor made in an interview about when we got things in the permitting department that's black and white. If it's gray, let's go with the builder. We don't have a lot of gray, ladies and gentlemen, and we really need to figure out a way that we can be more descriptive rather than prescriptive. And I really encourage us to think about that. The hard part is getting it from here to a body of 11. We'll walk into that meeting, and there's always going to be the majority that haven't been in the meeting, haven't put in the time, and it's hard to get them to understand in a little bit of debate on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Evans?
I hope you can sleep time. Got that off the chest.
Mr. Peterson?
I hope we can get down to number 5, because I was going to talk about some items there.
Perfect. We will absolutely get there. My intent today is, this is going to be rapid fire. My intent today is to try to get members out of here no later than 11, but I'm hoping by about 10:45 or 10:50, because there's an AEDC luncheon that many are going to. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Davis and Mr. Weaver to the meeting this morning. With that said, I am going to extend a moment of privilege to Erica McConnell, the planning manager. I let her know when she walked in this morning that I have moved to reconsider AO 2015-83, and Mr. Hall is going to be the second. So that'll be back before us, but this gives us an opportunity from the department's perspective to give us some discussion and some thoughts on what happened last night and maybe a way forward.
Well, Erica, I'd certainly want to speak to it, but go ahead.
So I also had trouble sleeping last night. I think I spent about 4 hours turning over what happened and what I wished I had said last night. And I definitely hear, I heard what Mr. Evans said last night about flexibility. I hear what you're saying about flexibility. But I urge you to be cautious, because when you provide staff discretion, so Mr. Starr said he wants things to be quick and easy. The fastest way to get a project reviewed and out to building is to have a measurable standard. If Sharon comes to me and says, I want to build this sign, and the requirement for the sign is 50 square feet, we look at it, oh, yep, meets 50 square feet, you're done. But if it's no larger than necessary, there's a lot of things you have to think about. Okay, now I got to go look at the content. Is all this content necessary? I don't think this is necessary. Now I have to go back to the applicant and say, well, can you write? You got to write out something to justify that this is necessary. And then I review this, and then I think, well, how does this compare to the ones that I reviewed over the last 6 months, a year, so that I can try to be consistent and fair? How does this compare to the ones that my partner? We have 2 zoning plan reviewers. How does this compare to the ones that they reviewed and approved? Okay, well, I don't, I've decided that, using my professional judgment, that this section isn't necessary. So I go back to the applicant. No, this is larger than necessary. Well, this person, last week they approved something that was this big. Why can't I have that? So, okay, let me go pull that permit and look it up and see what the determination was made. Still don't think it's necessary. I want to speak to your boss. It gets elevated to me. I'm pretty busy. It might take me a day or 2 to get back to them. Discretion's really important in some situations, and I would definitely say that with the residential design standards, you have so many different possibilities that it's important to have that discretion. But something as simple as ordering boards and menu signs, to give staff discretion is gonna not make it quick and easy. And I wanna tell you about the architectural feature provision and kind of what really happened. But first of all, we have 2 zoning plan reviewers, 2 people who are in the development services section, and they do the zoning, the Title 21 review for all building permits, so things that don't come to the planning department. Last year they did 3,270 reviews, so over 260 work days. That's over 6 reviews per day, per person, assuming they worked every single day. And of course they didn't. Sometimes they were sick, they took vacations. And of course it isn't spread out easily that way. So there's a lot more in the summer. So they're getting a ton of these reviews. So when someone goes on vacation, there needs to be backup. So far the backup has been the code enforcement section. And due to whatever reason, sometimes there's not, there haven't been meetings about, well, here's how we interpret architectural feature. And frankly, I don't even know how to interpret the architectural feature section. That's one of the reasons that it's been so difficult. Can you pass those down, please? So at some point, the Chicotney sign that's on the left of what I'm passing out came through, and there was whatever argument with the staff, and it was determined that this frame that's around the sign was an architectural feature. Well, Mr. Potter talked last night about allowing things that are cool, and people have talked about creativity. Well, is this what you mean? Because that's not what I think of as creative or cool. But now we've set a precedent. So when this sign came in and they said, will you let the frame around the Chicotney sign be considered an architectural feature? So this is an architectural feature. What can I say? I can't say, oh, no, your frame, their frame may have been, but your frame isn't. Or, we tried to say, well, that was a mistake. Well, their sign's still up. They still got it. You got to give it to me if you give it to them. So when that discretion is there, if you have somebody who maybe is not as experienced, who maybe sees staff discretion as the ability philosophically to say yes to whatever the applicant wants, you're then allowing them to set a precedent that we have to live by forever and ever. So I really hear what you're saying, but from the perspective of the staff, it takes longer and it puts an intense burden on them. It's really hard to be fair and consistent. So I would encourage you to be careful about what you give us discretion to do. Thank you.
Jerry?
And on top of that, you know, most of the developers that come to us, that whether in-state or out-of-state, what they want is a fair, quick process with predictable results. And that requires standards, and that's, you know, you hear from some of the locals that we need more flexibility in the code. Well, there are certain sections of the code where you do need some flexibility, but for the criteria that you had before you last night, we believe the standards are more appropriate. For those exact reasons that Erica pointed out on the development reviews.
Mr. Evans?
Yeah. I was talking to Mr. Hall before this, but most of the problems with laws is we try to draft laws to address the extreme exception to normal behavior. And we figure we have to incorporate that exception, otherwise somebody's going to take advantage of the law. And I think this is a good example. What is there a problem with anybody has with either of these two signs being fine?
So this sign got 32 square feet more than they would have otherwise been allowed, which maybe that's not a big deal, but what if it had been a lot bigger? I mean, the whole point of the sign code was to say we want to place a limit on the ultimate size of the sign.
Right. Well,
So-
yeah, because, you know, and I remember when the airport big sign,
Yeah.
parking sign came up, and I kind of drove a lot of that. You know, and there's an advantage to businesses to have their informational sign or their name big so people can see it. As I understand the code, the informational part, the actual sign itself, there is a limit that is, you know, set in stone. These architectural features, this how we make the whole sign presentable or how we look to the public. Like, you know, this one obviously has a bigger frame around it than the other one, but I can't imagine that it's very likely that there's going to be somebody who wants to put this huge frame around the sign, because it also makes the sign look smaller. It actually takes away from the sign. And for what purpose? Just to block out vision? I mean, we're trying to address a problem that it doesn't even seem to need to be addressed. Why would somebody put, like, KLA sign looks fine to me. It doesn't look, you know, beyond norm. I don't think people are going to get offended by it. Are we just concerned that the next guy is going to come down and he's going to want to have twice as much frame around his sign, and we're going to have to say it's okay because we did it on this one? And even though it'd be hard to imagine why he'd want twice as much frame, but I guess it's possible. That's the type of flexibility I'm talking about, is that we're trying to eliminate the possibility of extreme situations, and like the menu boards. I mean, yeah, well, I think I mean.
Mr. Hall, then Erica.
Yeah. Erica, I really get what you're saying. But it's kind of tough when you're sitting there and you're reading an ordinance that says the logo can't be more than X. I mean, you know, that, to me, that was so specific, it was unbelievable. You know, if we come up with a deal that says, you know, any signs not to exceed X or what have you, I understand what you're saying, and I guess what I'm saying is help us figure out a way to write code that allows some flexibility, but by the same time gives cover. I mean, I don't know how much they could use in a logo would matter. Space, it's just we write these things to such specific standards that when people come in and read it, it's like, wow, there's just no creativity left here. So there should be a way that we can draft it, that we kind of accomplish both, because it's not fair. I mean, but by the same token, you know, we elected officials get caught in the same thing. I dealt with a gentleman 2 weeks ago who just put in a $8,000 sprinkler system, and then right away come out and had the contractor rip it out, where the 3 neighbors around him have exactly the same thing. And the comment was, well, we made a decision, we're not going to put these in the right-of-ways anymore, because if we come in and mess them up, we have to fix them, and you can build it off the right-of-way. And he said, so tell me why it's right. And the same thing, I'm referring to the same thing you're in. Why is it right that they got to do it, I can't, we're neighbors? So we get put in that same box, and it's hard to figure out a way, but I find it hard to believe we're smart people. We could figure out a way to draft some of this stuff where we give maybe limits, but allow flexibility within it for some discretion.
Okay, we're gonna have 2 more minutes on this conversation, and then we need to move on. Erica, you wanna finish up?
You know, we took that limitation on the logo thing out of
Yeah.
the uniform sign code, and that can go, you know, whatever. If you don't care about the size of menu boards and ordering screens, let's just say they're allowed and not put a standard on them, not put as large as necessary, not put 50 square feet, just say they're allowed, and later on, if they become a problem, then we can go back and do something. I mean, we were just trying to follow a national standard, but if we don't think that's necessary, that's okay. In terms of this, I mean, I think our interest is in regulating the entire size, because we don't really care whether this has one message for one business or 10 messages for 10 businesses. Our interest is in regulating the entire size. So if we're only regulating the message size, I don't think we're meeting the intent of the sign code. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and move on from this discussion. And the last thing I'll say on this, you know, I take responsibility in that ordinance failing last night, honestly. I supported the amendment of Mr. Evans, and I think I said that I could have gone either way, because I understood what staff was saying is, one of the things I think is you live by the sword, you die by the sword. You give somebody super flexibility, and the problem you have from a builder's perspective, I would think, it would be hard to be predictable what you're gonna get from project to project, because there's no it's not, this is my box and I have to live within it. It's up to whoever is on the other side of the counter that day. And so that's exactly what my comments were, and that's why I could have gone either way with it. I tend to like the idea of what the mayor had said in that, you know, if there's a gray area, go with the builder. I like that. But with this one, I think the staff made a good argument. But I live with I like the idea for there to be creativity.
Can I just clarify
Yes.
what I was there in the room, Sharon, was as well, when the mayor met with the plan reviewer?
It was the manager of engineering
The
services.
manager of engineering services had a set of plans. We were talking about e-review and how the functionality would get much better. And then Rosh showed him the code.
Book
about
after book after
that
book after
stack
book.
of code, the building. And Ross indicated that when it's clear in black and white in the code, and when there's discretionary area in there, the discretion should go to the engineer submitted
Meaning the
document.
builder.
Yeah.
Meaning the builder. And it wasn't to diminish the language in the code that are prescriptive, but it was just a philosophy to say when there is discretion, give that to the applicant.
So that actually came from the department. We were really pleased that the mayor thought enough of it
I
to bring
I
it up in his
appreciate
remarks.
that, because
Yeah.
I think that's a good philosophy. And that's why, you know, when I looked around and I counted noses last night, I pretty much guessed it was gonna be a 6 to 5 failure. So I intentionally voted no, because I knew it would give us an option, if we wanted it today, and I knew we would have this meeting today. So we have reconsidered it, we'll bring it back. I was thinking we may not have a meeting next week, but I think it will be productive for us to have a meeting specifically. And if there's committee members that want to advocate for either passing it as it was amended or amending it further, I would like to have that discussion next week, and I will take a vote of the committee members whether we're going to support it or not support it, because I think if we have a unified front, and that was my failure, I have kind of shied away from doing that with ordinances, but I think if we have a little skin in the game, and as a committee, if we have either approve or we oppose an ordinance, I think it will help other members on the body, kind of give them a little guidance as to, as a committee, we've hashed it out, we've really talked about it, and we do support it or we do not, or we support it with these amendments. I think it maybe help with some of those members that are kind of on the fence and could go either way, rather than a last minute comment from Mr. Flynn, or swaying people. I think people would be a little bit more solidified and comfortable if they knew that those that sat through all these ordinances and really hashed out the details behind Title 21, if they support it, I think it'd be helpful. So that will be I think that will be the only Title 21, or no, your ordinance is up next meeting too?
Yeah, both.
We have
Okay.
one more minor cleanup ordinance that's processing too, but after that, we're finished
Okay.
processing ordinance.
So what I'll do is I'll look at the agenda, anything that's up for next meeting, we have one more meeting on this committee before that. We'll bring them all up in this committee. We will have those robust discussions. If anybody wants to make amendments to them or whatever, I will actually take a vote of committee members to see where we're going with all of these ordinances. And if it's not unanimous, we'll present the vote to the other members so they know. We want to be clear and transparent, but we want to be able to have these conversations, and it's difficult when you get last minute amendments to fully sometimes discuss them and when you're right there in the assembly meeting. So we'll do that. Yes.
Can you draft language in doing an amendment to that? I mean, I think we're receptive to some direction, but see if we can come up with language that can give some flexibility in there where, follow what I'm saying?
He's trying to find a compromise. So we'll bring it back up. I know you're gonna have to chew on that, I can tell. So think about that. Next week, these Title 21 ordinances will be the only thing on the agenda. The reason I say that is we'll finish up with the Title 21 order panel. But next thing on the agenda is the committee mission statement. So Chairman Trainee and Vice Chair Gray Jackson have indicated to me the new name of the committee will be the Community and Economic Development Committee. Being that economic development, a big part of that is going to be community development and what happens in the industry and in development around the community. So what I would like is for members to think about a mission statement, think about how you see this committee developing and growing, the things that we'll consider. I personally think as the building community builds, I think that's a good economic engine for the community. So I think it's good to have them encompassed. But when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about not only Title 21 and building codes and processes may be more administrative, but I'm also thinking about tax abatements, and I'm thinking about those types of things that might need to be tweaked, not only in city code, but in state code. So I think it's good for this committee to chew on those and think about those and weigh in on those issues. So please think about a mission statement. If you could email them, we can discuss it. We'll add that to the agenda next time too. So if we have a couple of ideas, hopefully we can solidify that, and the chairman is planning on basically ending the Title 21 committee next meeting and creating a new community and economic development committee. So that's kind of the plan as it's been relayed to me. Okay, now on to the real business for today. We have about 15 minutes, so I just want to take about 5 minutes to look at the Title 21 work plan. Just for everyone's information, I have been discussing with Assembly Council, the Clerk's Office, Department of Law, and the Chairman. This committee, as we go through Title 21, we need someone who's very experienced in code and who understands it. And the Department of Law, since Mr. Wheeler's departure, really is, I don't want to say lacking, but they feel it would be a good thing for us to have outside help. Hence, Mr. Wheeler's attendance this morning. We have drafted a sole source contract that is going to be put on the agenda for next meeting. They had gotten to me late last night, and rather than lay it on the table, I didn't want members to kind of freak out. And so I had them just put it on the agenda. People can look at it, they can vet it, they can ask all the questions they want. But the hope is that Mr. Wheeler can assist us in this process. And as you look at the draft Title 21 review, there's an actual timeline here. And, Barbara and I had set this out. As you can see when you look at it, it's pretty aggressive. And I would not be surprised to see this creep into maybe really not finishing till maybe March, to be honest with you. But the goal is we wanted to make sure that we had a succinct plan and that we can follow it. Now you can see the chapters are not assigned yet, and that's done on purpose because Jerry, Erica, you guys have been through this time and time again, and I'm hoping your expertise can kind of help us lay out a succinct. Okay, these three chapters are really easy as we go through. I was hoping to go through systematically, starting at the beginning and going through. So you might.
I just asked why.
Why?
Yes.
Because we've had a number of requests, not only from assembly members and the community, but they feel there are things within Title 21 that should be addressed. Hence, you see the ordinances coming from Mr. Evans and Mr. Hall, the Live Work Play Group. So I think it's a good idea to re-review it.
That's fine. The assembly title, subcommittee can do that. Just I indicated earlier, when we get through with 76 and 59 and the other amendment that's coming forward, we don't have any other ordinances to come forward. So really, you should identify specific issues that your constituents have brought to you, and then we work through them. But this takes up an extreme amount of our resources that we don't really have.
Okay, so let me just go through. Just off the top of my head, I can tell you, in my community, monofills, accessory buildings like garages, public notices, Chapter 10 has to be done. So in my community, just the last few months, there have been a number of things that have been brought up, and rather than just throwing one thing into this, I think systematically, we can start at these 1 chapter, 2 chapters, 3 chapters, saying, was there anything anybody knows about in these chapters that anybody thinks needs a second look? And if the answer is yes, we can address it at that point. I mean, if you wanted, I could bring forward, 5 ordinances.
I know there are those dangling issues about accessory structures. We wouldn't change our position on accessory structures. I mean, if you want to do that in Chapter 10, we can certainly look at that, but there's pretty sound criteria as to why
Well, let me give you an example. So the accessory structure can only be 50% the size of this primary dwelling, right? I was asked from the department, I was asked where that number came from, and I was told it was arbitrary. Now, it makes no sense to me if you have a house that's 1,600 square feet, maybe they're on an acre lot and they want to they can only build an 800 square foot garage, it makes no sense.
Yeah, it really wasn't arbitrary. It's taken out of, is it answering to the primary use, and that's really, but it could have, and that's the premise of the zoning code, that those accessory structures are secondary to the principal structure, and there really was a lot of old case law, but what number is correct here, each community is going to decide what number is correct, and the number that we have in the code presently, that was debated at the many times, in many discussions with the assembly members on the Title 21 committee, and conclusions were reached. So, I don't have any problem in addressing any issues that your constituents have, but we've been using 2 codes for over 2 years now. We can't continue to do that. That we're looking forward to the first of the year to moving forward and doing some of the other.
Well, no one's talking about extending old Title 21 at this point.
Right.
And my point is, I just completely disagree with you, Jerry. I saw the internal memo that was issued by you that essentially denied multiple permits in my district, and I just disagreed with it. And ultimately, those decisions were reversed, but those are the discussions. When we see something in the code that we think we can improve, I think we should. And I think it's a good process to go through systematically.
Totally
Mr. Hall?
amenable to working with you.
Honestly, Mr. Mbasi, on this one, I tend to follow Mr. Weaver's court. I liked where Mr. Evans came from. I like where you're at here. I don't even know where you came from, but it was a good place. But I think when we're dealing with this, we got a specific, like you're talking about some specific things, that makes sense. I was here for 4 years, 3 years, going chapter by chapter, and it's a nightmare. It really is, but I think when we identify specific items within Title 21 that needs to be addressed, that would be a very good use of time.
Well, and I think that's exactly what we're going to do. It's just we need to do it in a systematic fashion. And that's why I think starting at the beginning saying, there might be chapters that everybody looks at, everybody reads, no one thinks there's an issue with any of them, so there's nothing to be done. And I think that will probably be a significant part of it. But there are things that I think would be helpful to have a structure in place in order to do it. And unfortunately, my experience thus far with the Department of Law, I've asked simple questions. Like I spoke last week or a week and a half ago with Dee about planning and zoning people being collaborative on this committee, and I was told, well, initially we think that's fine, but give us a day and we'll get back with you. 3 calls to the Department of Law have gone unanswered. So to think that they're going to be able to help us, number one, get up to speed on rewriting any code or amendment changes and doing it in a quickly and efficient fashion, I think is optimistic. Thus the reason why it was recommended not only by the Department of Law, but by Assembly Council and the Clerk's Office to bring in Mr. Wheeler to help us get through this quickly, because I don't want to rehash the 12 years spent on Title 21. But I don't want to, from my perspective, operate in a vacuum and bring forward 1 or 2 things or 5 things in my case that I think need to be addressed. And then all of a sudden there's what happened last night, nothing gets done. I would like it to be a more succinct plan. Yes, Ms. Rowe?
And I appreciate the idea of bringing order to how we're going to proceed. I think that has been needed. Sometimes perceptions are important, and I think the only danger in doing it the way it's proposed is it gives the impression that we're rewriting Title 21. Yeah. And that's not your intent, but if we're going through each section and looking for changes, I think that's the perception that will be created among the community that that's what we're doing. And I'm a little concerned that obviously you have some specific ideas that you want to address. There may be some others. I don't have any, but this is laying out 6 weeks of work or whatever, and if there are sections that really don't have any issues, we're just kind of wasting a week. I do think it might be, I like the systematic approach, but it may be better organized around issues than around just kind of a broad look at the Title 21, because it's going to make people nervous, first of all, unnecessarily nervous.
Sure.
People are very vested in Title 21 and the way it is, and my goal is to get Title 21 in place, get the old ordinance gone, start working off of one, whether you believe it's a good ordinance or a bad ordinance, start working off that, and fix problems as they arise. And that could be now, or it could be after Title 21 is in place and these things arise. I think it'll always be a process of addressing that.
And part of why I'm trying to make sure that we basically have this solidified. We know new Title 21 starting January 1, but we also know in the near future we have 6 experienced assembly members that are no longer going to be on the body.
Thank God.
Right. Mm-hmm. So now all of a sudden what's going to happen, and this is just from a realistic standpoint, let me be honest, you're going to have all these new assembly members that come in that want to start all over again with Title 21. And, I'm concerned
that's
about
the point I was going to make, that every time you get new members of this committee,
and then you
you're
start
going to
again.
get rewriting
And
them.
so what I'm trying to do at this point is leverage Ms. Johnston and Mr. Hall's experience and get us through this. And it's not to say every week you have to look at this, and this is why I laid it out in this fashion, because if the department says basically there's nothing wrong with Title 21, we don't think there's going to be anybody to have any issues, we can't really help you lay out a plan. I'll look at Title 21 and I will send out to all the members, okay, chapters 1 through 3. Does anybody think there's any issues within this, or have you heard of any concerns? If the answer is no, obviously we can just look at the next segment and say, okay, Amy knows she thinks there's an issue with accessory dwellings. This is the time we review the code, we look at the practical application, and we either recommend a change or we don't. So that's kind of what I was thinking. It's not necessarily because it's laid out with League 1, League 2, you actually have to meet if there's nothing. You just move along to the next subject. I can tell you within chapter 10, my community basically has to write it. I mean, there's a lot, there's some there, obviously, there's a lot there. But we have to put in, rural road standards, there's certain things that needs to be discussed, so, and I know it'll have to be discussed. Debbie has a committee out there, that would be very intricate in that process. So I think, from that perspective, I don't want this to scare anybody. This is essentially a rough outline on how to be organized, and basically, those low-hanging fruits, whether we're talking about, and I can tell you, in my community especially, people really want to robustly insert language about monofills, specifically beef it up within Title 21. It was a very contentious issue, and they're afraid it's going to come back. We've talked about notification. Can we improve? I think there are ways to improve public notice within Title 21. How do you do that? We're talking about marijuana regulation. What constitutes a community meeting? How do we know what was really said in that meeting is accurate? I mean, we've started to have these conversations, and that's why I say, we can throw spaghetti at a wall, or we can actually follow a recipe. That's my thought. Todd?
Yes, from the staff perspective, I also sat through years of assembly committee meetings, and I think we counted that there were approximately 120 or so on the project.
Tell them they can't hear you on the tape.
Okay, we had approximately 120 committee meetings. My perspective of going through on a chapter-wide basis is that it may actually do the opposite of saving time. If we go issue specific, sometimes those issues straddle chapters, and the way the new code is structured, the chapters and the issue specific items, they straddle each other, and it's very difficult. A single project has to do with chapters 4, 6, and 7, for example. If we open up the chapters, just following up what Bill Evans said, I think there's likely to be that perception we're reopening it. And the biggest thing about that is that from my perspective, an issue-specific conversation is a much more efficient use of time, especially staff time. When you open up a chapter, we have to be prepared to re-explain hundreds of pages of interconnected material. And I know from the 3 or 4 iterations of the committee's review, each time we went through a major issue over and over again. And I can tell you that will affect other projects that I'm involved with if the department wants to put forward the resources to explain.
Okay, good point. Okay, we need to move on very quickly because this is our time. So I think that was constructive, and I think that was helpful. So then what I will ask members to do is scour your memory, your sources, staff, public, whomever, and make a list of all issues that you know of relating to Title 21. And we can develop a work plan around that if that's the will of the committee. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think that'd be preferable.
Okay. See, I listen. Okay, so we will do committee, and I will start my list because I have a list. Then the next thing, as I said, we'll still be putting forward a committee request or a request for legal services to help us with this. Because the one thing I don't want is I don't want 2016 to come and there to be, I would really like staff to have a working document, and there are some of these issues that I know of. It would be nice to have it kind of taken care of. So, Mr. Whitler, do you have anything? Just checking.
Ma'am, I do not.
Okay. Next thing, planning land use relating to marijuana. Mr. Peterson, do you want to start?
Sure, thanks, Madam Chair. After the marijuana committee adjourned the other day, I didn't quite make it out of the building to the parking lot before a couple of citizens wanted to talk to me about some things that had been discussed in the meeting. And the first thing they brought up was they thought that my question about what the zoning status is of greenhouses in Anchorage was a really, really good question. And so I'm wondering if anyone has the answer to that question right now. And the reason they thought that was a good question is because they felt that anywhere in town that people were allowed to have a license for a commercial greenhouse, they should certainly be able to get a license for a commercial marijuana grow. Which it's just a different flowering plant. As
Mr. Hall?
was brought up to me.
I will respond to that and certainly let the department weigh in on it. The problem with that, Mr. Peterson, is it is a flowering plant, but it has a tremendous odor to it. And when it is in a residential area, it's a major, major problem. Those greenhouses, I forget how many times they cycle the air in them in order to make marijuana plants work. But Denver, every place else has pretty much moved these out of residential into industrial, so they're not bothering the residents around them. And I don't know, but my guess would be the majority of the greenhouses that we've got in this community have been grandfathered for God knows how long. I know we've got one, Bell's, over in my neighborhood off of Strawberry Road that is just surrounded by homes. I mean, it's just this little enclave they got in there, beautiful grow operation. But I can't imagine marijuana being allowed within that area because of the residential area around it. So that's the big thing, is the odor from the operation. That's a real problem.
And then, Madam Chair, let me continue. I decided to go down to the block party that they were having from the West End, the 14th annual block party that I never even knew existed before until I got an invitation from Visit Anchorage. So I went down there, and while I was waiting in line to get a burger, another person had been at the committee meeting, came over and started talking to me. And he told me that his estimate is that there are 5,000 growers growing in residential areas of Anchorage right now that have been growing for decades. And
Be interested to see where that number comes from.
this is what he told me. And if they've been doing it for decades and no one has smelled their product yet, then it probably hasn't been a problem.
Well, I saw an article in the Alaska Star this last week. In Eagle River, someone has been growing in their closet of their house. So I'm assuming some of those residential growers, that's the kind of,
Small scale.
Those people aren't doing what, let's say Bell's turned into a marijuana grow and they've got, I don't know how many greenhouses they've got in there, but you're not talking about 5 or 10 plants. You're talking about greenhouse after greenhouse after greenhouse that's putting that odor into the air. And they will use quite a bit different ventilation system when it's legal than what they're doing in their closets and basements at home. I think people are concerned about the odor coming from 24 plants. If the state ends up saying that's going to be the number 24 in a home, it's going to be a pretty strong odor. So it really is, honestly, Pete, it's the odor and the fact that neighbors around them just go ballistic when you do a commercial grow inside a residential area.
Well, I think the odor can be dealt with. They have ionizers that have different sizes that you can buy that neutralize and recirculate the air. So
Erica?
and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to provide information that commercial horticulture as a use is allowed by conditional use in the R1, R1A, R2A, R2D, R2M, R5, R6, R7, R8, and R9, and the PLI, and it's allowed by right as a permitted use in the B3, the I1, and the I2.
So commercial grow is allowed in all those areas? Is that what you just said?
Commercial horticulture as a use, which would be your greenhouse operations.
So, that might be something, if we decide that marijuana grow operations are not permissible in residential or some of those zoning areas, we might actually have to change that language and then articulate where it is.
Well, the way we've proposed to go forward is to create entirely new uses for marijuana.
Right.
So assuming that is the direction that the assembly decides to go, we won't need to make any changes to commercial horticulture because any sort of marijuana grow operation would just be a different use that would have different.
That's the T you want to.
We're just now
the
formulating
team.
those concepts
Yes.
and ideas and regulations that we'll be meeting with administration here shortly to go over those. So it'll be a collaborative effort to decide and make these issues.
So to follow up, Mr. Evans, I don't think, are you on the marijuana committee?
No.
Want to be?
I didn't think so. So,
No.
staff proposed, they didn't staff provided us a copy of a very rough draft of potential, yes, please. So,
No.
so this is just, and this is, we'll call it a super draft. None of this is set in stone. It's initially ideas of thoughts of potential way forward.
It's not finished.
Yeah, I know. That's why I said it's just a super draft. So it gives you an idea of kind of thoughts that are starting to be bantered about. We won't get into that one today, but it's something I think you should read, and it'll probably spur some. You do every once in a while have some good ideas.
And one additional comment, if I could just take another half a
Yes.
second here. We are looking at a potential, economic downturn in Alaska. We have to keep that in the back of our minds. And I actually think by allowing the people that have been in the black market for years to give them an opportunity to come out into the legitimate market, it would create numerous small businesses that otherwise would not be created. And I'm afraid the way the zoning is set up now, we're encouraging a super wealthy individual to come in and build a very large warehouse and corner 50% of the market or more. And I actually don't think that that is actually good for our economy. I think it would be much better off if we had it diversified in a lot of small operations than in one or two very large operations. That's just my opinion.
Good comment. Okay, so we're gonna, so my thought then is, next meeting next week, we'll talk about the ordinances and the mission statement. We will hold the Title 21 proposed ideas of things that maybe should be addressed for the August 12th meeting. That will give the Assembly the opportunity to weigh in on the legal contract services that I'm putting forward on the 11th. And so we'll kind of be able to formulate a plan around that. So next week, okay, I said that. And then, so let's bring up on August 12th, we'll talk about Title 21, and then let's robustly go back through the potential idea with dealing with marijuana and look at Erica's draft. Let's do that on that meeting. And then, okay, so next thing, Tom, can you give us an update on P&Z, the land use plan map?
Yes, department, we've requested a work session with Planning and Zoning Commission. We're shooting for that to take place next week, and what we'd like to do is give them the benefit of the overall briefing that the committee received, and so they can give us an informed sense of their ability or desire to go through that schedule and be able to explain to them as a whole. So hopefully we can finish getting word back from them next week as to which day they can.
That would be helpful. I still am of the mind that I think it would be very helpful for us in dealing with the marijuana issue. I think the land use plan map would be a key part in kind of envisioning throughout the city where we think development will be, especially, large scale development. Because I think there will be, whether we want smaller developers too, I think there will be large scale development, my best guess. Yes.
The industrial land study project, we are planning to have that produced and distributed finally. And Bill Reed, the fellow who came to the work session in February, has been able to give us a final number on the potential impact of marijuana. And he's been able to follow up with one of the questions that arose from the work sessions about a question as to the critical industrial sectors that will be most important to prioritize in the land use
Do you
plan.
think you'll have that out by the middle of August 12th, or do you think it'll be a little later?
He will have that out that week. We are waiting on purchasing department to take care of some technicalities.
Okay.
Making sure we can do that. We were thinking of a potential work session to discuss that.
That would be
Going
great.
through the assembly chair.
That would be great. So one of the things that, just briefly, One of the issues that we're dealing with out in Birchwood, Chudiak area has probably the most industrial land in the city. And one of the issues, the chairman and I went out to the MEA board meeting last week because some of the businesses, we actually have manufacturing right there on Birchwood Airport, happens to be a foreign trade zone, but they were having issue with their power load and not having enough power. And so it was important that MEA, who services the area, understands the future growing needs of that area so they can plan their capital appropriately. And we wanted to make sure that, in fact, they were willing to make the investment so that we could grow our economy, essentially. Let these industries, and one of the things I'm looking at is, realistically, if I look at where industrial land is and the power consumption used through marijuana grow operations that you hear about in the news and the lower 48, what they've experienced, there has to be that discussion. So I think that meeting, I'll invite MEA to come. I know Mr. Starr is talking about the potential of ML&P expanding its service area and basically taking over MEA's service area, which, just to let committee members know, that'll be complicated and it'll be a huge legal battle in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but it's important that right now the people that service the area are at the table, I think. So, Tom, do you think it's possible for August 19th to have some sort of presentation on that? Industrial?
Yes, that's right in the time frame when Bill could be in town. I could confirm with him. He has indicated he'd be available in town on the 14th, the Friday the 14th, or the following week, the 21st.
So I'll work with the chair on that because the chair is intimately aware of the MEA issue, and so is the vice chair. So my hope is we can bring MEA in so they can hear from kind of the horse's mouth, what the projected growth is and the availability. Because that'll be another issue that this committee, if that proposal comes forward, this committee is really going to have to go through. Okay, I'll stop talking now because that's good enough. I will send out everybody an agenda. Sorry, lost my words. An agenda for next week's meeting and and I'll give you a preview of the following two. That way you can have ideas. You'll see the ideas that we talked about today where we'll address them. And if anybody has anything they want to add to it, just let me know and we can adjust it.
Can I make 2 quick comments?
Yep.
Less than a minute. One is I think it's absolutely, the reason I requested the name change for this committee is I think it's absolutely essential that everybody involved with this give every impression that the battle over Title 21 is done.
Yeah.
So that we don't have the situation where we have people still trying to rewrite it.
Yeah.
So whatever we can do to end that and so that it's in place and going forward, and we can amend it as we go along, but it's over the decades-long battle. And the second thing is the mayor and Chris Schutte, myself, and a few other folks are going to Wichita and Oklahoma City Monday and Tuesday of next week to look at how they do community development planning there and permitting and all that thing. Supposedly they do it really well, but I'll be glad when I get back, maybe we can have Chris and myself, we can give a report to this committee about what we discovered there.
May I?
Okay, that would be great. And the other thing I can tell you is I had a conversation with the mayor yesterday, and I asked that Chris start attending these meetings because I want to bring the administration in and be part of the process. I think it's futile when we each are bickering and we're not in silos. We need to work together. Yes, sure.
2 words when you're there. Please remember, Winter City, seismic considerations. That's 2 things those cities don't have. So you can remember that while you're talking to them and think about.
Wichita has a little winter, but not as much as we have.
The last thing I'll say is we're trying to make a very concerted effort to make sure that people realize that we're not attacking Title 21 or trying to rehash. We just want to fix or edit things that we think we can improve upon. But part of that process is making sure that the public feels like they can ask a question or that they can raise a concern. I know we're running just a little late, but I'm going to take 2 minutes just to make sure there's no public comments or questions. Okay, Ms. Roday, anything?
Other than one word, just one word only, it's called communications. You guys need to talk to each other.
And also, I would say for anybody in this meeting who wants to get the Title 21 updates, please send your contact information to Barbara Jones, the municipal clerk, and she'll get you on the email list. No. Okay, Mr. Wood.
One thing, I have not been to all 120 meetings, but I've been to a lot of them. And over the years, we had the had pretty broad language, and then people said, no, we need more precise stuff, so we know exactly what needs to be done. So then you get, no, that's too prescriptive, you're telling us too much, and you go the other way. We've gone back and forth, back and forth. So I support more, pick the specific issue rather than the chapter by chapter, because I just see this committee, and it's not that it's wrong, it just, at some point it has to end.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wheeler.
Madam Chair, no.
Okay. Any other comments from staff?
I just wanted to say, you had mentioned that you think this maybe not be realistic, and I just wanted to emphasize that because I think the assembly as a whole will be looking at both marijuana regulations and potentially the land use plan map in December, so probably I think this will slip, like you
We
suggested.
kind of already planned it. When Barbara showed it to me, I was like, I think maybe March. But I do appreciate everyone, even though maybe we're not going to have a chapter by chapter, I think it's still a good idea to realize my absolute 100% goal is to make sure the glaring issues that people have raised have at least been discussed before the new assembly is seated in April. Because I think that institutional knowledge of Mr. Hall and Ms. Johnson will be very valuable. All right, we're adjourned.